Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode with Lisa and Gavin here. Today, we're discussing GPOs, direct deals, and other paths that most sellers never really try. I know Lisa did a lot of prep work on this one and sent me over a lot of different notes that she has had a ton of experience in a lot of these different verticals. So I think anybody who is obviously selling to hospitals where this can be a benefit to them, this is going to be a really killer episode. To kick things out here, we'll start with national GPOs. There are a few of them like Vizient, Premier, HealthTrust that control about 60 to 7% of the hospital supplies market. So for companies trying to sell into hospitals, how realistic is it to actually win a national GPO contract? And what are the biggest mistakes sellers make when they go after one?
Great. Thank you, Gavin. So this is a big one. I think everyone wants to get on a GPO contract, and I think it's important because that's how a lot of hospitals buy for various reasons. But I think looking at the picture overall, the three big ones you said, Vizient, Premier, HealthTrust, I think, first of all, really understanding how your products and services fit into those contracts, right? So are there multiple vendors? If there are, that might be a little more challenging. Those GPOs have a cycle, so they may cycle and do RFPs every few years to go out to the marketplace. So you might have to wait until that cycle comes. So if you're selling, let's say, beds, and maybe that bed refresh is coming up in 2 years, the best thing you can do is really get prepared for those RFPs that come out for the GPOs, because they will have an RFP. So really always keeping an eye on those RFPs for those GPOs so you can do planning is really key. I would reach out to those contract holders, those who buy in those areas, because maybe they're looking for something specific that you might have. Introduce yourself, send information. I think there's other unique ways. Each of these GPOs have conferences. They have innovation grants, or ways that they can bypass their normal contracting, where you can, maybe they're looking for something innovative and then they'll bring in a contract on a specific unique term. I think that's a way. But yes, they do hold a lot of the buying. And I think it's really a matter of understanding when the contracting is, understanding who your competitors are, understanding what value you can do, have differently. And sometimes the GPOs will allow for things like custom contracts if there's a specific request. But I would say get to know the GPOs, get involved. I would say, reach out to those buyers who control those products. And then, from there, when you do submit your RFPs, just make sure that they're thorough. You're showing unique, distinct value, providing great pricing, making it easy to work with you. But I would definitely, they're not going to reach out to you. You've got to understand when your product or services comes due under their contracting. So I think that's probably the biggest mistake is, and I've seen it actually happen very recently, we just missed that contracting RFP. We just missed it. Is there anything we can do? Or it had termed, all the suppliers had provided their data and the deadline was missed. And they're like, well, can we still submit it? And, they can't. The biggest mistake is not knowing those cycles of when they're going to do RFPs and looking for your product. So you got to keep an eye out for that.
Yeah. I even think setting up a, different agent to notify you, look for them and notify when there's a new one in the timeline and just send you an email or something. It could be pretty
That's a good
easy.
idea because you could have multiple contracts on one company. So it's not just one product. That's a good idea.
I appreciate it. Yeah. Just trying to, like you said, make sure that those common mistakes, because someone could even have that sent to their whole sales team or whoever would be, in charge of, I guess, segueing that. But so for you, Lisa, obviously, a huge GPO that's, nationwide can even seem kind of intimidating for a lot of people. So before going after these huge GPOs, when does it make more sense for a supplier to start with a regional GPO or a purchasing coalition? And how can they leverage that to eventually land, these national GPOs?
Yeah, it's a great question in that, maybe you don't go after some of the national contracts, or maybe like you said, you land a few regionals and then you go after a larger contract. And I guess it's just a matter of, your own strategy or what you what you think. Have found over the years that the regional groups, the local coalitions, you can work with them in an easier way. They're more accessible. They do have the same contracting patterns where they're going to look to go out to RFPs in certain time frames. Sometimes they access the large GPOs. But the unique thing, Gavin, about the regional GPOs is that they buy in a lot of categories that are unique. So they're looking for services and products maybe the GPO doesn't have. So maybe that's really the nuance. So, something that's maybe non-contracted for on a national GPO, or there's something so unique that regional GPO says, look, we want to bring you on because of these unique features of what you can do for our customer base. And I think there's a higher touch expectation. So those contractors or vendors would be required to really be more hands-on with their regional GPOs because those coalitions want to add a different kind of value. They're providing a unique value, more value. So their value proposition to the hospitals is that we're going to come in and do more things for you. We're going to help you save money, make money, and become more efficient. And we're bringing on suppliers with that lens in mind. So if you as a supplier can do something very unique, high touch, offer value, maybe offer a free assessment with your service, those GPOs, those regional coalitions make a whole lot of sense. And they really are a great way to kind of have access to, a large pool of hospitals. But I think the expectation is going to be a lot more high touch, but it's a nice collaborative way to work.
Yeah, most definitely. And so we talked about those regional coalitions. We talked about the GPOs, but when would you recommend that a company skips the GPOs or the regional routes and tries to contact directly with a health system? And what evidence are these, hospitals really looking for in order to actually move forward with a deal like this?
Yeah. So, and I feel to answer one nuance, I'm going to answer one and then go into the direct contracting question. Sure. So the other area that's I think sometimes, look, I forgot about it just now too. What people forget about is going after like a government contracts, like the VA health system is one of the largest systems in our country, all the VA medical centers. So, but that's a different path, right? That's a path of, going in and understanding again what the government is contracting for. It's the same thing, but they also have technology routes. They also have different routes that you can take. And sometimes companies can join a company that already has contracts, and they might be, they might have maybe owned by a service or a vet or a disabled vet, and they're able to kind of join on their contract because the government does give preferential treatment to vets who have, those who have provided service, who have companies, and those who may be disabled. And so working with some of those companies can get you on contract and also get you an elevated status, a status of being able to buy. Because the hospitals have to carve out, the VAs have to carve out a certain amount to those groups. So it's a strategy. So I wanted to mention the VA system too, and to mention that there's even vehicles, people like, getting on contract with the VA. Yes, it can be challenging, but there's other unique ways that they provide. And I will say one more thing about the government. I had recently, and I don't remember off the top of my head, but I remember, I believe it's Hospital at Home Initiative. I forget what initiative it is. But they're actually going out to market to say, if you've got some unique products, and I sent this to somebody, but if you've got a unique solution, that they have a fast track program, they're looking actually to have you submit these ideas for a hospital home, and they will, they'll actually look at it in, an expedited fashion to bring it on contract or bring it through the government process. So again, it's one of those things you have to be so curious and going on the sites, looking around, because they're really, there's not a whole lot of like alerts. I don't know if you can devise a chatbot for that or an agent for that. But so I'll answer that. Going forward on the direct contracts, look, I think that's a great place to be, depending on your product or service, depending on if it's, how commoditized it is or how many other products are in the hospital. I mean, I think it's very determinant on those things, but you could win on price. Like sometimes going direct, you could just be in a market where you can compete on price, right? And so that could, look, a hospital, if they're going to get a price that beats their GPO price, it beats their regional GPO price, and it's the same like product, that's a decision they will make. I mean, hospitals should not be trapped to make a buying decision just because they have a contract with a GPO versus a direct vendor coming to them saying, look, this is the same and I can save you 20%. So I think the savings route is a big deal. I think what other value adds you can offer, like unique things that the GPOs don't have, right? That's a nice vehicle. Like, look, this isn't on GPO contract. And look, I would always try that route while you're trying to get on these contracts. There's no reason why you can't sell directly to a hospital. There's none. I think the only times it might get challenging if it's a state hospital where they have to buy from a buying group or they themselves have RFPs. But look, a lot of those state-run hospitals have their own RFPs. And they can buy from anybody. So again, another way to buy if you understand where those government-owned state hospitals are and they have their own RFPs.
Interesting. Have you seen that be a challenge, Lisa, where let's say somebody does actually have a better product with better pricing, but since it isn't maybe as convenient, let's say the hospital is used to purchasing so much just through a GPO or whatever it might be. Now they could save here, but they'd have to work with 2 invoices versus 1. Or how have you seen people navigate that? Is that a common problem that they have? If so, how have you kind of found the best ways to try to get people on board with that?
It's funny, and you asked that question because we didn't even talk about this or script or anything. But yeah, I've seen it so often where it's even a matter of changing out that order number in a system, right?
Yeah.
Let's say, for instance, like something it's very generic, like janitorial bags or something like that, or liners, where it's a significant savings to buy direct, right? But they have it in their system. It requires them to take that number out of the system to take it and then put the new one in. And there's some, or like supply chain or some data and data mechanics to it, data management, where that has actually stopped a hospital from saving literally hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I've seen it's a great question. And so, in my former, world, we used to bring those opportunities up, whether it was to a supply chain or the CFO. And I think those are always like, wow, that's incredible. We want to do that, but then it was this like minor logistics glitch. But really, maybe it would take an hour of somebody just paying attention to take one thing out and put it in and to literally save $100,000. In fact, I've seen it where, it really has saved jobs, really just making those decisions. So it's a great question. And I think, again, it's how people tell the story. And I think, so if it were me in that situation, I would do as best as I could to say, look, this is a frictionless process. I might even write out the process. Like it's as easy as doing this, this, and this. And instead of just saying like, look, we can save you money or go through, it's this like product, I might just go through all the steps, how easy it is. I can be there. I would actually make it frictionless. And I don't think sellers do that enough. We assume, while we rightfully assume that we save money, but sometimes saving money, you have to take the human factor in it. And the human factor, that's going to go on my desk until I get to it.
Well, and to what you're saying here too, like these people that are in charge of, these different purchasing decisions, it's not their money, right? So to your point, everyone has what's in it for me. Obviously, they can help the hospital save, which is a benefit to them as well. But if you can also show them, like you're talking about, how you can make their life easy, like, oh, look, this is literally all it takes. Now that's what's in it for them. It's I can accomplish this without having this huge headache, which is what they're uncertain about if they don't know what that process is like. So I think that's a great point that you brought up there. My only other quick follow-up on that too is if you I'm assuming this is something that it's usually a lot more effective if you bring it up to, like you said, like the CFO or somebody who is maybe a little more directly tied to being motivated to get that change done rather than the inconvenience it might take to that. Have you found that to be true in these scenarios as well? Or
yeah, I was speaking recently to a group of companies and they, for the most part, were selling into, I would say, the middle layer of a hospital, whatever that might be, supply chain or ops. And they were like, well, our products will never matter selling to the CFO really will never care about our products. They were I wouldn't say they were commoditized or generic. They were still very important. But I actually disagree because I've sat in front of CFOs and I've had other conversations with CFOs and been like, talked about that janitorial. Look, do I think you're going to get a meeting over a commoditized product? Probably not. But could you get attention? Could you push that out to the CFO in such a way that you show that CFO the opportunity and how you do it? You might get a meeting depending on the value, but I think it's the, truly, how do you put that together? They care. And frankly, they probably care a lot more because if these are low risk, easy to do savings, I think, and it could be, like 100,000, a few hundred or more, and you can deliver that truly. I think it is a CFO conversation. And I think we tell ourselves stories like, oh, they're never going to be like that. I'll never take a meeting. And I've had CFOs like want more of those easy wins, you know, so go deliver an easy win.
Yeah. No, beautifully said. So let's now say, okay, so I know a lot of hospitals care about spending money now with minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, etc. How can suppliers use the MWBE certification or partnerships to help get into these hospital contracts as another route if that is available to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a matter of, I think there's two ways to look at it. One is wherever state you're in, get your state certification. It's the easiest way because you're in state and there's usually some version of a state certification that can be done in 30 days. And then there's a bigger path, a longer path, which is the national certification. So certification's key. But when I actually had my company for 23 years and I never did it until during COVID. I'm like, oh, this is kind of have some downtime. Maybe I should just go get my, verify that I'm a woman-owned business. So I did it during COVID. And what was interesting is a lot of the hospitals were like, this is great, Lisa. You have it. I don't think for what I did, it was like the buying decision, but I do think in a couple of cases, it was a nice, like, oh yeah, checkbox. And I think it made it stronger, right? It just like strengthened everything else that I was bringing to the hospital, which was great, right? So, and I think that strengthening with the services and the things I had over time would make it very difficult, which it did, to have somebody come in and replace me because of all that. They would have to now replace a strong provider that was a minority women-owned business. And so I think that also can be a force of stability if you're offering, good services, you're delivering on it. So I think the local, national, I think every single hospital will have a way to talk about those initiatives. I would definitely reach out to supply chain. I know like Northwell, I believe in New York, actually holds those, minority women business owned days where they actually have vendors come in and they meet them. Every hospital is different. And some are really, really out there wanting to learn more about those contracts and really bring them in. I think it's a great advantage. So I would really seek out those hospitals you want to get in. Find out maybe some of them are super engaged.
Yeah. And well, like you said too, just through previous episodes and everything of the like, it's when you're competing with other businesses for the same contract or whatever it might be, like obviously every advantage you can get, especially when this is something you said you did once to get your certification and then you can continue to benefit from it. Like,
yeah.
And all the reps of a team could benefit from it. So yeah, that's awesome. And a wise thing to do for anyone that could qualify for that. And when would you say as well, being a local supplier gives you an advantage over a national contract just in those different deals? I have a couple ideas, but I'm curious ways that you've seen this really be beneficial for people that are, reaching out to hospitals in their area.
Yeah. So the reason why I ever even came up with this, and then I did research recently for a presentation I was given. So I was really surprised to see there was actually a network, but we were competing in New Jersey. It was an RFP and it was service related. We were competing on our services again. At that point, I did have my minority women-owned certification, but I found out after we won the RFP that the initiative for the health system, which was led by the CEO, was to buy local. And it was a really big initiative. In fact, the supply chain department and the leaders were like, they must have heard about it frequently from the CEO, about how important it was. So they had to go out and look for local businesses. And because that was part of his strategic goal. And so it was super important. And I couldn't believe it. And I actually like, Lisa, well, you're actually, working with you is part of our commitment. And we're keeping track of that volume because we have a spend volume to give to, to attribute to that initiative, the organizational initiative. So, and it was really important. And frankly, I would have to actually submit some reports so they could report to the CEO about progress and about what we were doing. And so what happened then, I was giving a talk and I wanted to mention that. And I didn't know that there's actually called the Healthcare Anchor Network, where it's actually healthcareanchor.network instead of .com. So .network, healthcareanchor.network. And where these health systems are committed to buying locally, just all over the country. And I think they're committed to have a spend of $1 billion over 5 years to buy local. So it is super, super. I think this is like a cheat code a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So every single hospital, you should go on their website and see about buy local. A lot of them have it, and really leverage, those hospitals that sit around you physically, locally, right? So it's in your state, could be in your county, could be close to you. And I would use that. That's a big initiative.
Yeah, that's really cool. I'm assuming the reason why these hospitals have this network is really to want to support the local communities. Is that correct? Or is there other motivations there as well?
No, it's just to support local communities. Think about it, the local economies. Think of how much business comes out of a hospital. It's just, hundreds of millions of dollars, and what positive force you can be to a local economy, right? That's your community. Yes. The hospital serves the community, serves the people, and the families, and also the businesses. And so these businesses are probably going to be very loyal too. Like, let's say you have local AC, like electrical vendors, or local whatever painters, or local whoever it may be, and you have issues, they're going to run right in. They want the hospital to succeed. They have a personal reason for its success as well. Their family goes there, friends. Yeah. So I think it's a very symbiotic relationship.
That is a really good point. Yeah, I could totally see how that would go both ways. And, when you first brought this up, like when I was looking over some of the notes you sent me, I was thinking it's more so, saving on shipping costs and these types of things. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Now, this is something that I also didn't know was a thing. You said that some hospitals have innovation programs. So things like venture funds or startup partnerships. How does this buying channel work? And when would you say it's better than more of a traditional route for hospital contracting?
Yeah, I don't think it's for everybody. I think it works. Let's say if you have maybe a newer company, it doesn't have to be brand new, but a newer company, or maybe a newer product, or something that's truly innovative that's been out in the market, and maybe it's time to explore these partnerships or these funds. I mean, I think those are great scenarios. I don't think it's for the typical larger, corporate, organizations, but certainly startup has, or new product, or something that they've had that's truly innovative, right? So how they work is, it does a couple of things, whether it's Abundant Venture Partners, Memorial Care Innovation Fund, there's literally 50 or 6 of these all across the country. But what they're looking for is a couple of things. What's valuable, it's not just about getting funding for your product, but they're looking for ways to bring innovation into their hospital, and maybe whether they get funding or not, or maybe they're looking to co-join and co-partner and co-develop and then go out to the market, and that's a revenue stream. Remember, hospitals today are actually looking for non-traditional ways, non-patient care revenue ways to make money. And so whether this is also an opportunity where they can invest, and the investment might be to have you come into their hospital or their group of hospitals, right, to sell. So you're growing, but then now you go out and you co-partner and sell in the marketplace. And so there's a number of those have been out in the market. But that's I think you could be as creative in these situations. And really, there's also strategy offered officers, these innovation departments, and really just having conversations with them. Like, you just never know what may be on their plate and or what they're looking to co-develop. And, things could get very interesting. Just thinking out of the box.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, do you have any stories or personal experience with this route, since it is a bit different than the other ones we talked about, where you or a client was able to really utilize it in a positive way?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a few stories. I just don't like just trying to think which ones I could share that were, yeah. So I think the one most interesting one was, right before I was actually selling my company in the process, and then I had a health system we were presenting to, and we were ready to do quite a bit of work with. And this hospital was looking for our technology and our services. And separately, without knowing, they called and they said, would you ever be interested in being acquired or doing some kind of co-development? And so I actually got the outreach from them. And so, that's a safe one story to tell. I've got a number of them in other ways where clients or companies I've known have reached out, and it's been successful. I'll tell you one more story, I think. But anyway, they reached out to me, and it was really interesting. So I just feel like they're looking for different ways to partner with companies in a more commercial way than most people think. So I'll tell you two stories really quick. Okay. So when I think it's UPMC, when they were looking to move to a new EHR, they're moving to Epic. Instead of like hiring Epic consultants, to help with implementation, they ended up buying the largest third-party Epic consulting firm, and they bought them because their installation was going to be so big that it was actually less expensive to buy the company, and then to have the company, which is really smart. Someone was really smart, so they bought them, so they had them, and then to use in the, as an acquisition, now they had the implementers, the largest Epic third-party implementation company. And then from there, then they were used, could be used to commercialize other places. And I think, there are many companies that I'm surprised with these days that they don't have any product at all. They have an idea, maybe a framework, and they're going to these innovation companies and they're getting funded. Now, that's a separate thing, but I just think that you'd be surprised what you can do in vehicles to sell.
Yeah. You never really think of a hospital being the fund that can invest into something that, that's really interesting how they're trying to find other ways to diversify revenue streams and bring in.
They have to.
Outside the walls of the hospital. So that's really
correct.
Cool. Now, to switch it a little here, a lot of sellers, if they have someone within a hospital, like a physician, nurse, department head, who absolutely loves their product, they think that the deal is done. But in hospitals, a clinical champion can open the door without actually being able to carry the purchase power through something like finance, the supply chain, IT, legal, value analysis. What makes a clinical champion useful? Where do these champions typically lose power? And how should sellers help them build a good internal case for their product or service without, overly relying on them alone?
Yes. So I think that clinical champions or champions, commercial champions, internal champions are really important, but we'll talk about clinical champions are really important. And I guess it really comes down to, like who that clinical champion is. I mean, it just depends, their weight, their leverage, how much volume they do, all that matters. Like if you're going to pick a clinical champion, you probably, you might want to pick one that's busier or that they're on committees or a little more vocal or active. But that's not to say that any doctor or a clinical champion can't move your product through, but sometimes some of them can move them through a little easier. I mean, I actually had a client previously, and we did some work very successfully together, but one hospital where he actually had a clinical champion, and it was even the department chair, a lot of leverage, just everything we'd said. And he had really challenged getting this product through. And so that's unusual, right? Because he had done the paperwork, he'd had the meetings, he did everything he was supposed to. He was department chair. He was, he was recruited to come there. It was all these things. It seemed like everything would just line up perfectly, and it didn't. It took a while. But hospitals are trying to control a lot of that because, you think about it, Gavin, if every single hospital accepted every single product, that even if it was a clinical champion, there would be hundreds of the same product on the shelf. So there has to be
Yeah.
some decision making going on,
Yep.
because then the hospital bears the financial brunt of saying yes to everybody, and there has to be a frameworks and matrix around that, which I do believe in. So I think, important to have a clinical champion that gets you in the door to have some conversations. It's not the end all. And I think the other two parts of the question is you've got to be able to arm your clinical champion with ROI, financial models, the conversation points, because that he or she is going to have to make those cases, and you can't leave them without actually paper documents that they can show and speak to, and not because this is better for my patients. It's got to be a lot more than, that's the minimum standard. And then from there, what does it replace, or what does this enhance, or what does this do? Does this increase revenue? I think it's gotten really complicated. I think the better the case that you hand to your champion, the better. And then finally, yeah. So I actually think that's in and of itself, I could probably speak a whole podcast too, but certainly there's a lot of frameworks that I work with my clients on a clinical champion. Once you get a clinical champion and how you arm that clinical champion.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to it. And recently I did a project like that, and we were super successful, but I'll tell you what, it takes time. And I think the problem is a lot of companies don't invest in a lot of time at this point, and they almost leave that champion out, alone, without really arming them with lots of documents, details, and really being strategic about it.
Yeah. No, I love that phrase, arming your clinical champion. I'd love for you to touch a little bit more on that, and even just to kind of paint a picture with some examples. Like when we talked, for example, in one of the previous episodes about the executive asset, right? And if I'm remembering the name correctly, where you're sending a 16-page kind of white paper style, direct mail content to one of the C-suite executives or whatever. How do you best arm a clinical champion? Would something like that be almost too beefy and too thick to give them to just pass along to somebody else? Or is that the appropriate length? Should it be more concise? I'd love to know kind of your thoughts on just some of the most common, most successful ways you've seen people arm their clinical champion.
Yeah, I mean, there's a multiple ways, and it's very similar to what we talked about, but it's not 16 pages. It's it's a lot lighter, and I think it has to it has to meet. There's a couple different frameworks. I mean, it's got to achieve clinical outcomes, financial outcomes, operational outcomes. I mean, that's very broad, but I would say. And so I have a whole methodology around this, but if I'm going to, kind of talk about it on the podcast very briefly, I would say it comes to, there has to be this defined ROI, right? It's got to attach to does it save money? Well, prove it. Does it make revenue improvement? Prove it. Understanding how the hospital gets paid, and be able to speak to some core frameworks of, really understanding what the hospital's paying for, getting reimbursed for, any kind of efficiencies. But then I think, there's a framework, and this may overlap a little bit in value analysis. So maybe we skip over that for a moment, but I'll start talking about it. But it has to speak about the issue, the impact, the urgency, and the outcome, right? So the issue is really clearly defines the problem, the bottleneck, the area of improvement. So, it's making sure that, what's the issue at hand that this product, is coming in for? What's the impact? So this is the ROI. So what's that measure of value delivered? The urgency, look, the physician might have brand new cases he or she wants to bring. So the urgency could be brand new cases, or a special case that's a brand new opportunity. So I think you got to speak with urgency. And then the outcome, again, we go back to, sometimes companies don't spend enough time on that ROI and the outcome. So it's the details of, this is DRG 475 or these different DRGs, and we're able to save every DRG $500, or you'll make $500 more. I mean, there's so much specificity, but I think this issue, impact, urgency, outcome is a framework, but a lot of things come down to, even what the hospital has is for the initiatives. Maybe, the hospital had a safety issue. Something happened on a safety side, and now you've got a product that if you could really show could impact, maybe they're in a kind of situation where they're in a fine or they have to show they're making an improvement and your product can do that. But I think that's probably the best way, like arming your physician with a language, 2 or 3 pages. Here are the talking points. I do a lot of like talking points for my physicians, and I actually give them talking points. Like, here's what you can say. And, and it really, we're very appreciative of it. They're like, this is so great, Lisa. Now, this is actually what I wanted. Is perfect. Because you'd be surprised. I think we assume they're smart and they can articulate, and they are smart. And they can articulate things, but you're asking them to articulate a commercial. Really, you're asking them to do your work as a salesperson, negotiate to sales, and that's not what they're there for. So now if you hand them the talking points, you hand them these things, these frameworks, these ways for them to communicate. The physicians are like, "Thank you so much."
Yeah, that's a great point. It really is, because if you take a step back and think about it, like, it reminds me of the Zig Ziglar quote, which is like, if you want to get what you want, help others get what they want, right? It's like, if somebody's already willing to help you out and to be your clinical champion for your product or service, if you can just help them understand the most effective ways to communicate that, like it will, be way more likely to actually effectively happen. So that's really smart. And I think, that just makes so much sense to me in so many ways. Now, you touched a little bit on value analysis in that last answer as well. But if we dive deeper on that, I know that even after, a GPO contract or interest from a hospital, sellers often have to go through value analysis. So what would you say that sellers misunderstand today about how value analysis actually works in hospitals? And what are the biggest reasons you would say that good products still get rejected at this stage of the deal?
Yeah, I think that it's true. Like, you could be on contract and, I have a GPO contract. Great. Still has to go through value analysis. And I think the key reason is that for most of the genesis of value analysis is twofold. One is that they don't want to bring a product that's not safe, right? Or that the nurses don't use or don't agree with. So they have to get alignment. So value analysis is really about, okay, we've got something internally. It seems like everybody's happy with it. You're asking me to replace something or add to it. Then I have to get buy-in. And I think from a clinical quality perspective, that's the right decision. So value analysis has significance in a hospital. And secondly, their job also is to look at sets of quality value, nursing value to the operators. And then the other value is the financial value. So are we bringing in products, if it meets that threshold, is it at best at the same cost, right? And maybe it's adding more on the clinical value, but it can't be more expensive, right? And if it is more expensive, then there's got to be a real reason why. And so I think vendors, I get why, like, oh no, it's in value analysis. This is terrible. But I think if you understand why it is there and respect why it's there, it's a really important part of the hospital to, again, ensure safety, clinical value. Help the nurses need to know how to use as doctors. It could be other people in the OR, so they have to feel comfortable. And that's hard. It's hard when you've got multiple people that have to give their thumbs up to something. And so that's it. The other part, of course, is the financial ROI side. So where does it fall short for vendors? I think sometimes you just have to be patient. Some of it is patience because there's just natural bottlenecks. It's a lot of things coming through, and they're doing the best they can with all the requests and all the changes. And they've got a lot of different competing priorities. So some of it's patience. And then some of it is, did you make it easy for them to say yes? So do you have a value analysis kit all put together, a package put together? Are you giving them value to help them make that value decision? And I think everyone puts something quickly together. And I think if you get there, I think this is where you dig in to put in a complete, strong value packet for them so they see the value, right? And you're really thorough. And, I think outside of that, and when I say all value, it's really like a 3D view of how they're going to make a decision. And I think why it fails sometimes is that vendors come in and they're very linear, like, okay, they've only thought about it. They've only proposed it in certain ways. And I think you've really got to put it together in such a packet, in such a way And, like be creative. And I mean, I could have, again, it comes down to like, how easy are you to buy from? How easy are you to, like willing to, okay, we can take your current product off the shelf if we get through this
Yeah.
and then put our product back on. Like, otherwise, if they may say, we're going to like bring down those supplies and then bring yours in. Like, there's just a lot of different, buyback programs, ways that you could be creative if something is, whatever that challenge may be.
I mean, I think that's a great point, Lisa. Like, even as you're talking about all this too, I'm thinking of, for example, if somebody had a document where they brain dumped all the different, like, benefits of their product, service, whatever it is, right? And they put that into GPT, even on something like Chat GPT, where that GPT's goal is to help create these customized like value packets at this stage. Then they can brain dump all the relevant details about this current deal, whatever, and it can like reword it in a way that is showing the specific value for this stage. I think that makes a lot of sense. It's like, yeah, people get to that point and assume the deal's like, oh, it's pretty much done. But yeah, those little things obviously can make a big difference, as you're pointing out there. So
yeah, I mean, and it might be time to get your clinical champion involved. It might be time to schedule a meeting. It might be, like you may have to do some interventions for sure. But I think, I think this is a whole strategy in of itself.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And now so getting closer to the end of the episode here, let's say that somebody does get approved on their contract, right? What do sellers typically misunderstand about getting hospitals to actually use the product and adopt it after the contract is signed in their first 90 to 180 days? And what do you recommend they do to really drive that adoption?
Right. So you're saying the product's in and maybe that clinical champion is starting to use the product, and how do you get greater adoption? It's a great question. So first of all, again, don't assume that you've got your clinical champion now, you get the product in. You really want that adoption from the clinical champion, right? Like, how much can you ensure you're there, checking in, how's it going? Like, you want that success, right? That's your number one priority. And I think from there, this is where I see a lot of companies really could do a better job, is how do you expand that to other physicians, other hospitals, and a network. So you've got a contract, and how do you like expand that contract to other physicians to say, look, I have this available. We're on contract, and start selling it to other physicians, selling it to other nurses. Do you think we could use this in other places, in other facilities, in the ASC centers, expanding to other hospitals? I see a lot of companies that maybe they're only in one hospital in a large health system and they haven't fully optimized, but I think those are the ways you could do that.
Yeah, that's perfectly said. And for the listener with no GPO contract, no certification, no investor connections, what would you say is one move that they can make this quarter to get closer to, being able to execute on some of these strategies that we discussed today?
Yeah, I mean, if I were making one move, I would go the direct path. Like, I would just, really try to pick out maybe 10 hospitals you really want to get into. I think the one move probably is a local move, right? The hospitals closest to you, I'd make the local move, the local direct move, and be able to, so that, you do have that leverage of being a local provider, because that is an advantage. That is something they're looking for. And then being able to be local, then to be on site for meetings, to be able to give some maybe additional value. But I would say that, and then going direct and really understanding those hospitals in some unique ways. And look, going direct might mean that they have an innovation partnership, or that they have some strategic initiatives, or they themselves may be part of a local coalition that you could find out about. But I would definitely do the local direct, and really, pick out those, 5 or 10 hospitals around you. And I would pursue those with very specific strategies.
Beautifully said, Lisa. Is there anything else that you want to share with the listeners today, just on everything we discussed, or anything else that comes to mind?
No, I mean, I think, I would definitely reach out to me if you're interested in some of these strategies and going deeper. I think that these are really probably a lot harder these days. And so being able to, kind of have different ways to approach and different strategic paths is really key, and you can definitely win in these areas. But no, other than that, I think, it takes one or two I'm speaking to that individual sales rep, or maybe it's a company, but it takes one or two of these, hospital contracts or hospital partnerships to really make a difference for you individually. You'll learn a lot. And from there, you serve well, you'll get referrals. It's easier to sell and grow. And I think that's the biggest message. So thank you, Gavin. This was a great conversation once again.
Yeah, thank you so much. And for everyone listening, if you want to get in contact with Lisa, her website is lisatmiller.com. That is the best way to do it. So Lisa, thank you again for coming on. It was a pleasure learning from you today and sharing all this information with everyone once again.
Okay. Thank you, Gavin. And to get in touch with Gavin, how do you get in touch with Gavin?
Yeah, well, best way, honestly, would just be to send me an email at gavin@empathyfirm.com.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Thank you, Gavin.
Lisa.